They said no one would come to bury her child. In Dust Hollow that morning, the wind carried the taste of grit and resignation. Maggie, Tate knelt at the edge of the shallow pit, her fingers white against the rust-red soil as tears carved lines down her cheeks. Each loose clod crumbled in her grip, mocking her grief. She paused, clutching a broken silver locket, her late husband's gift, then pressed it into little Ellie's cold palm. She buried her hope with every thrust of the shovel, Maggie whispered. She turned back to the empty earth and her lonely task. The sun rose over Dust Hollow skeleton. Splintered boardwalks sagging under an indifferent light, shuttered windows framing silent rooms, and mine shafts yawning like skeletal fingers against the horizon. A few weather-beaten cabins leaned into the desert wind, their porches cluttered with rusted tools and cracked barrels. Sagebrush rattled beyond town limits, and tumble dust blanketed every surface. The Assay office's broken scales and saloons' idle bar stools carried echoes of once ambitious men whose fortunes had dried up with the veins of ore. Only the Tate name remained spoken, said with scorn, whispered with blame for debts owed to outlaws. Maggie rose to her feet, shoulders trembling under the weight of every cold dawn and fruitless day. She cradled Ellie's tiny shroud against her heart before kneeling again and driving the shovel into stone-hard ground. Sweat pricked her brow as she labored. Each inch of earth yielded only after all her strength was spent. Her knuckles blistered, and the sun's glare made her vision swim. Still, she dug on, pushed by a promise she made beneath a pale moon, to give Ellie the simplest dignity of a proper grave. When her arms buckled, she sank against a standing beam of splintered wood, and the locket slipped from her fist. Gently, she brushed the dusty silver open, finding Samuel Tate's smiling face in faded sepia. The photograph's edges curled like drying petals. "Forgive me," Maggie breathed. She laid the locket atop Ellie's bonnet, smoothing the child's cheek with the back of her hand. It was a gesture no one in Dust Hollow would help her perform, for her husband's debts had brought ill luck and outlaw shadows to their door. Now she buried both her daughter and her hope in this pit. From a fringe of the burial site, townsfolk watched through narrowed eyes. The storekeeper shuttered his windows. The saloon barkeep kept the swing doors firmly closed. Children scoped behind weathered barrels, daring each other to glimpse the grieving widow's labor. Not one offered a shovel. Not one spoke a word of comfort. Maggie's world had grown so small that her only companions were the desert wind and the ghosts of a past life. By midday, she staggered to her feet again, dizzy with thirst and exhaustion. Maggie pressed her hands to her aching back, the soles of her boots scorched by the sun-scorched earth. She spat a mouthful of dust, face streaked with tears and grit, and cursed a fate she had never chosen. Ellie deserved better, belonging more than blame and bitterness. She would have dignity in death, if life could afford none. A sudden clatter of hooves made her head whip around. Her heart seized as a lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouette taut against the sun's blaze. Dust plumes trailed behind him like ghostly wings. The rider approached the grave, reins loose in one hand. Maggie braced herself, expecting a sneer or an order to cease her digging. Instead, he dismounted without a word. His boots sank into the cracked desert earth with firm resolve. He stood a moment, hat low, shadow shading a countenance lined by wind and hardship. A well-worn duster and weather-beaten saddle spoke of miles ridden, of stories untold. A revolver hung low at his hip, but there was no bravado in his carriage, only a quiet purpose. Maggie's aching limbs startled her upright, and she clutched her shovel with blistered fingers. Without a greeting, the stranger picked up her shovel, its handle worn smooth by her grip, and directed its blade into the stubborn ground. He dug with steady, sure strokes, each thrust breaking through rock, as though the earth recognized the strength in his arms. Maggie watched, stunned, then set aside a second shovel she kept at the pit's edge and joined him in silent partnership. With each shared scoop of soil, the loneliness of her task shifted. Caleb Shaw's shadow stretched long across the grave, his silence a salve to her raw grief. Hours passed in dusty communion. The sun arced overhead, while their shovels carved deeper into unforgiving earth. Sweat and grime plastered their clothes to their skin. Maggie's breath came in ragged bursts. Yet each time she faltered, Caleb glanced over, nodding once, a quiet promise to share the burden. At last, as the sky softened to ochre and the wind hushed, the pit reached a depth to hold the small coffin of her daughter. Caleb laid down the shovel against a weathered rock and extended a gloved hand to steady Maggie. She drank gratefully from. The desert sun faded toward a blood-red haze when the riders at last burst into view. Their horses pounded the cracked earth, hoofs kicking up clouds of tumble dust that clung to Maggie Tate's calico skirt and Caleb Shaw's duster. 8 men rode hard, faces hard as flint, leather-brimmed hats pulled low. Their leader, a scarred outlaw with a jagged slash across his left cheek, reined his mount a dozen paces from a half-dug grave. The others fanned out, revolvers swinging loosely at their hips. Maggie's heart thudded against her ribs. She had buried her daughter's dreams in these red soils, and now the past galloped back on iron hooves, demanding payment. "I warned you, Widow Tate," the leader called, voice like gravel over stone. "My men gave your husband time to settle his debts. Time's up." Maggie pressed her palms to her aching arms, knuckles white as she stared at the outlaws. Fear wrenched her breath in shallow gasps as she clutched Ellie's small shroud, now stained with sweat and desert grime. "Please," she whispered, voice small against the outlaw's threat. "I have nothing left." Caleb stepped forward, shadow stretching long across the grave's edge. His hand drifted to the butt of his revolver, its polished steel glinting in the dying light. "He left her enough to bury his mistakes," Caleb said softly, voice carrying over the tense hush. The outlaws laughed, harsh and hollow. "One spat," says the stranger. "What makes you think you can protect her, gunslinger?" Caleb's eyes narrowed. Without warning, he drew his pistol in a single, fluid motion. The crack of his revolver rang out, echoing against the distant mine shafts. Bullets chipped rock and kicked up shards at the leader's horse's hooves. The outlaws jerked back in alarm. Caleb holstered his weapon with measured calm, steel in his gaze. "You ride away now, or I'll carve a new debt into your hides." For a heartbeat, the outlaws hesitated, revolvers still raised, lips pulled back in sneers. Then the scarred leader spat again and signaled. Hooves thundered as they wheeled and galloped off into dusk, leaving a trail of dust and bitter defeat. Maggie sagged to her knees, hands trembling. Caleb crouched beside her, offering a steady arm. She leaned against him, tears pricking at her lids. "You saved me," she said, voice raw. "Why?" Caleb's weathered face softened in the dim light. He reached into his coat and produced a broken silver locket. "This belongs to your husband," he murmured. "He lent me shelter once. Let me help repay his kindness." Maggie gasped as she recognized the tarnished locket, its tiny portrait now cracked but unmistakable. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. Caleb's gaze flicked to the gathering night. "He gave it to me when I was down and out by the mine. Told me I'd know its value someday." Maggie's fingers closed around the locket, warmth returning to her chest. Sparks of gratitude and sorrow tangled in her gut. "My Samuel," she murmured, voice breaking. "He stole gold from the mine because we had nothing. The debts, they swallowed him whole." She trembled as a confession surfaced, each word an ember against old shame. "I buried that secret with him, Caleb. But now the past rode in with those hoofbeats, and it won't let me go." Caleb rose, rolling his shoulders as though shrugging off desert weight. He brushed grit from his duster and nodded toward the abandoned mine entrance half a mile away. "Then we face it together," he said. Maggie squared her shoulders, surprised by her own steadiness. With Caleb at her side, her fear bent into determination. They trudged through shifting shadows toward the yawning mine shaft, each labored step carrying them deeper into her husband's hidden sins. The mine entrance gaped like a cavernous wound in the earth, timbers blackened by years of neglect. Maggie hesitated at the threshold, dust motes swirling in the lantern glow Caleb offered. "Inside," he urged gently, "there's proof." She swallowed and edged forward, the lantern circle cutting through the darkness to reveal piles of rock and splintered timbers. At the back of the shaft, a crude wooden box lay half buried in rubble. Maggie knelt and cleared dust from its lid, her husband's initials scratched deep into dry pine. With trembling hands, she pried it open to reveal nuggets of raw gold, small but shining like hope. Tears welled in Maggie's eyes as she stared at the stolen gold. "He stole this to keep us alive," she whispered. "I never meant honor's crime." Caleb placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You didn't ask for any of this," he said, "but we can use it. We'll offer it to mine owners or to whoever will forgive the debt. You deserve peace." Maggie wrapped her arms around the box, its weight grounding her in a sea of grief and guilt. The gold glinted in the lantern's trembling glow, a testament to both desperation and love. Footsteps echoed behind them, sudden and deliberate. Maggie's heart locked in suspense. Caleb drew his revolver again, moving to shield her. The mine shaft's mouth framed the scarred outlaw leader, his eyes reflecting the lantern's flicker. He spat a curse, face half lit by dying light. Recognition flickered across his scarred features. "Maggie Tate," he growled, voice low with memory. "Thought I'd never see you again." The lantern trembled in Maggie's hand, illuminating the contours of a face she had hoped never to meet. The past had found her in the heart of her sorrow, and now it demanded reckoning. As the outlaw leader stepped closer, his gaze flicked between Maggie's tear-streaked face and the box of stolen gold, Caleb's revolver glinting at his side. The world tightened to a single breath, one that would decide whether Maggie's secret would bury her once and for all, or set her free. Jed Carver's voice cut through the mine's hush like a whip crack. He stepped forward, lantern held high to reveal a face etched with betrayal. "I reckon you thought you could hide that gold forever, Maggie Tate," he snarled. "Sam stole it from our claim. I was his partner in that vein. You owe me every nugget." His hand flicked to the butt of a pistol cradled at his hip. The lantern's glow trembled across jagged timbers, and Maggie felt the broken locket pulse against her chest, an iron heartbeat of guilt and fear. Caleb Shaw squared his shoulders between Maggie and Jed. Dust clung to his duster, and his revolver gleamed cold in his hand. "You ride off, Jed," he said quietly. "Leave this woman be." Jed laughed, a dry, empty sound that rattled the rafters. "Who are you to speak for her?" he spat. Maggie's throat tightened as Jed advanced another step, each echo underfoot sounding like doom. She dared to meet his stare, and her voice trembled with defiance. "This gold belongs to no man but Samuel, and now to his daughter's memory. I will not give it up." Jed's scar drew taut as he glared. "Some debts can't be paid with gold, only with blood." His words hung in the stale air, and tension coiled like a viper ready to strike. Caleb's grip on his revolver tightened, every muscle in his frame primed for violence. But before steel could sing, Maggie's voice broke over the stillness. "Jed, you're more than a robber," she said, stepping forward so Caleb could not fire. "You were Samuel's friend. You knew why he took that gold. He did it for us, because the mine's walls offered us nothing else." Her confession trembled between them, raw and pleading. Jed hesitated. Lantern lowering his memories flickered behind his eyes. For a heartbeat, the outlaw's fury gave way to something colder, regret. But the moment passed as fast as a desert mirage. "He betrayed me," Jed growled. "He left me to pay our share alone." He swore and holstered the pistol, but the tension did not leave his stance. Maggie's breath came in shallow bursts. The tunnel spun with guilt and grief. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted this pain." Jed's snarled response was cut short by a rumble overhead. The timbers groaned as if warning them to flee. A sudden wind sighed through the entrance, stirring the lantern's flame into an angry flicker. Dust spiraled in the air. Distant thunder rolled across the desert. Caleb glanced at the opening, where storm clouds boiled in from the horizon. "We should move," he said, voice low but urgent. "This shaft's no place for a stand." Maggie nodded. The gold box clutched her chest like a lifeline. Jed backed away into the gloom, his silhouette swallowed by shadows. "This isn't over," he called, voice echoing in the tunnel. "I'll be back." They emerged into a sky turning violet with gathering clouds. Maggie shivered as raindrops hissed on the parched earth. The storm moved fast, wind whipping sagebrush in a frantic dance. Storm clouds rolled over the desert, matching the turmoil in Maggie's heart. She held the box of gold beneath her shawl, its weight a reminder both of salvation and of fresh danger. Caleb guided her toward the cabin, distant but solid against the gloom. Maggie's small home, once a sanctuary, looked battered under low-hanging clouds. Its weathered logs creaked as the wind found every crack. Maggie frowned, worry etching her features. "Jed knows where we are," she said. "He'll bring his men." Caleb tightened his coat collar and led her inside. Maggie lit a lantern on the kitchen table, its glow soft and hopeful amid the encroaching dark. Rain smacked the roof with urgent insistence. She placed the gold box on the table and sank into a chair, shoulders hunched. Caleb stood by the door, scanning the swirling storm. "We can't let Jed take that gold," Maggie said, voice firming with resolve. "It's all I have left of Samuel and of Ellie." Her gaze drifted to the broken locket hanging around her neck, glinting in the lamplight. "It's proof of our past and my promise to their memory." Caleb moved beside her, resting a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone now," he said softly. "We'll face him together." Maggie drew a shaky breath, gratitude sparking amid her grief. Their shared struggle had forged a bond neither had expected. She nodded, forced courage rising in her chest. Outside, the storm's fury grew. Clouds roared like runaway freight trains, and lightning cast brief, stark shadows to the cabin windows. Maggie and Caleb moved quickly. They blocked windows with rough-hewn planks, braced the door with a heavy table, lit extra lanterns, and stacked old chairs near the stove for warmth and defense. Maggie tucked a locket inside her dress, her fingers brushing its cool metal. She took a deep breath and met Caleb's steady gaze. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, revolver in hand. They crouched near the shuttered windows, listening to the storm's thunderclap and the distant roll of hooves that stirred the dust beneath. The wind screamed around the cabin, rattling every beam like a warning bell. Maggie's heart pounded. This fight would decide everything: her daughter's memory, her late husband's legacy, and her own fragile hope. She squeezed Caleb's hand, a brief gesture of comfort. Through a crack in the planks, they saw them. 5 riders emerging from the swirling dust, outlines blurred by rain and gloom. Jed Carver led them, pistol drawn, face set in grim determination. His men fanned out, revolvers raised. The cabin door shook under a sudden blast of wind and an outlaw's fist. Rainwater seeped beneath the boards, pooling on the floor. Maggie swallowed her fear and rose, raising the lantern so Caleb could see her clearly. As the first outlaw kicked at the door, Caleb raised his voice. "Back," he called. "Stay back, or someone dies tonight." His revolver gleamed in the lantern's light, and the voice of thunder seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Maggie's fingers trembled on the gold box tucked at her waist. The broken locket rested over her heart, her silent witness to every choice she had made, and every choice still to come. Outside, the storm and the outlaws closing on Dust Hollow's lone cabin, and Maggie knew the final reckoning would be a fight for her family's soul. The door shuddered beneath Jed's next blow, and the world held its breath, waiting to see who would stand and who would fall. Night had fallen in Dust Hollow, and the storm raged on. Rain hammered Maggie Tate's cabin roof in relentless drumming, each drop a sharp percussion against weathered wood. Wind moaned through the cracks, rattling shutters as Caleb Shaw and Maggie crouched low by the blocked door. Shadows danced across the floorboards, cast by flickering lantern light. The broken locket hung at Maggie's throat, its silver half-moon catching the glow. She pressed a trembling hand to it, drawing strength from its weight. Outside, Jed Carver's outlaws circled the cabin like wolves, their horses stamping in the mud beyond the lean-to. The scent of wet sage and smoke from a distant lantern drifted inside, mingling hope with foreboding. Caleb leaned close, voice calm amid chaos. "They'll strike any second," he warned, checking the doors tethered by thick rope. "Be ready." Maggie nodded, shoulders squared. Each crash of thunder shook the cabin, mixing with her thudding heartbeat. She clutched the box of stolen gold at her waist, gold as heavy in her hand as her grief. "I can lure them off," she said, eyes bright with desperation. "I'll offer the gold if they let us go." Caleb's jaw clenched. "You won't face them alone," he answered, stepping forward so his silhouette filled the doorway. Lightning flashed, illuminating his determined face. "We defend together." A fierce blow rattled the planks. Maggie staggered back as a lantern tumbled from its hook, extinguishing in a hiss of steam. Caleb fired a warning shot through a small gap, and the outlaws retreated a pace, snarling reprisals. Splinters flew as another outlaw rammed at the door, yanking the table aside. Caleb sprang forward, elbowing the intruder and sending him sprawling. Maggie seized a moment to dash behind the stove, shielding the gold box. Her pulse hammered, sweat and rainwater mingling on her brow. "Come on," she hissed to Caleb. "Use the storm." A sudden crash split the night as the storekeeper Amos burst through the back door, shotgun barrel gleaming wet. "I couldn't let you fight alone," he panted, rain soaking his coat. "I owe you, Maggie." "My sister, your daughter, nurse her." He trailed off, voice thick with regret. Amos's presence brought a spark of warmth to the frigid panic. Caleb gave a curt nod and handed him a lantern. "Cover the east window," Caleb directed. Amos scrambled into position, scanning the swirling darkness through a narrow gap in the boards. Maggie seized a kerosene torch left hanging on the wall. She carried it to the center of the room, raising it high. Flames sputtered, casting giant, trembling shadows on the rafters. "Here," she said, voice strong despite the storm's roar. "Tell Jed I'll trade every nugget for safe passage, no bloodshed." Lightning struck again, and through the rain-streaked window she saw Jed's silhouette, hat tipped low, hand raised to hail his men. Maggie's courage rose with her voice. "Jed," she called, "come inside and meet me, no tricks." Her words were swallowed by thunder. Jed Carver's drawl replied from the gloom. "You think I trust a widow's promise?" he sneered. "Bring out the gold now, or we burn your shack." Maggie's heart clenched. The torch's flame flickered as Amos reloaded. Caleb slipped behind Maggie, revolver drawn. "Some legacies are forged in fire, not gold," Caleb said quietly, remembering scars from battles past. His voice carried the weight of a secret. Among Jed's men rode Ethan Marsh, once Caleb's trusted partner, now an outlaw with blood on his hands. Ethan's voice cut through the storm. "Caleb Shaw," he spat, "I swore I'd see you hang for saving yourself." Thunder roared like cannon fire. Caleb faced a window, every muscle coiled. "I chose life," Caleb called back. "You chose betrayal." The tension crackled between the old allies turned enemies, the cabin trembling as rain pounded its walls. Maggie's torch trembled too, and she gripped it tighter, tears stinging her eyes as guilt and fear warred within her. Jed's shadow flicked with movement outside. "You got until the count of 3, he growled. "1. Maggie swallowed and stepped forward, raising the torch high. She placed the gold box on the floor between them. 2, Jed continued. Smoke from the torch curled around her, mingling with the cabin's damp air. Maggie dared to look at Jed through the window grate. "I don't want blood," she said, voice resolute. "Take the gold," end this tonight. Her gaze flicked to Ethan Marsh's face, marked by past wounds and fresh rage. Amos trained his shotgun on the nearest window. Caleb glared at Ethan, recognizing the cold hatred in a fallen partner's eyes. And Maggie, golden box at her feet, felt sure that every choice she'd made, every secret she'd held, had led to this moment. The storm's fury reached its crescendo as the final words fell. Jed Carver counted 3, and the outlaws surged forward. Flames danced from Maggie's torch, Rain sizzled on hot metal, and Caleb stood ready to defend her with every ounce of grit he'd learned on dusty trails. But Jed drew back, fingers brushing brim of his hat. He signaled his men to pause, tilting his head. "We'll burn it down," he snarled, voice low. "Ashes for lies, ashes for gold." With that promise, Jed backed away into the storm, torches aloft. Rain lashed the cabin, and the wind moaned through shattered boards. Maggie's knees buckled. Amos rushed to steady her. Caleb lowered his revolver, gazed hard in the lantern light. In the flickering glow, Maggie lifted her tear-stained face. She gathered the broken locket in her palm and clutched it to her heart. Outside, Jed's silhouette dissolved into swirling dust and rain, torches flickering like malevolent stars. As Maggie and Caleb braced for the flames Jed promised, the cabin trembled under the storm's wrath, and Maggie knew the final reckoning would arrive with fire, not blood. The door rattled, Amos's shotgun ready, and Caleb's voice cut through the darkness. "Hold fast." But the torches glowed brighter, and the night held its breath, waiting for the inferno that would decide their fate. Lightning's final bolt raised the horizon as Jed Carver raised a drenched torch to Maggie Tate's cabin, intent on turning her refuge to ash. Rain paddled the roof in thunder's tattoo, each drop a ticking clock in the night's endgame. Inside, Maggie clutched the broken silver locket at her throat. It was pressed tight like her resolve. Caleb Shaw's revolver lay in a dim circle of lantern light, barrel dripping molten droplets into mud-streaked floor. Amos cradled his shotgun with white-knuckled calm, eyes fixed on a rain-slicked porch where Jed's men fanned out with blazing commits. The locket's gentle weight anchored Maggie. She would not be driven from Ellie's memory without a fight. Outside, torches hissed as embers met deluge. Jed's outlaws lurched forward, boots slipping on the soaked wood. Sparks flared under every slide of a torch tip. Maggie thrust open the door, brandishing the locked box of gold. "Stop this madness," she cried, voice rumbling like distant thunder. "The gold is yours. Take it and leave." The soggy prize glimmered in her outstretched hands. Jed snarled, torchlight carving his scarred features into something feral. "You think coins can wash away betrayal?" he spat. Amos fired a warning shot. Flame and water collided with a hiss of steam. Caleb sprinted to the edge of the porch, pulling Maggie back as a half-lit torch skidded past. In that moment of wavering flame, figures climbed from the muddy lane beyond. Townsfolk from Dust Hollow, ragged but steady. Ramon Cruz, the storekeeper, led them, rifle cradled like a lifeline. Miners, women with lanterns raised, and even the barkeep who once shunned Maggie now carried hoes and axes. Each wore worry in her eyes, but also fierce determination. As one, they formed a half-circle before the cabin, arms and weapons at the ready. The storm seemed to heed their courage, rain slackening to a steady drumbeat. Maggie's heart surged with relief. Dust Hollow had come to honor her grief and bravery, not to bury her alone. Jed's hand tightened on the torch. He glared at the assembly. "You'll regret this," he growled. From the railing, Caleb stepped forward, rainwater dripping from his hat brim. His clothes clung to him like a second skin. The storm's final gust tore at his duster, revealing a long, faded scar across his neck. His gaze bored into Jed's circle of men. "This ends now," Caleb said, voice clear. "No more threats. No more blood." A few outlaws wavered. The storm's wind whipped Jed's coat open to reveal the glint of his pistol. Rain plastered his hat to his head like a dark crown. Ethan Marsh, Caleb's former partner among Jed's ranks, stalked forward, revolver in hand. Thunder rumbled as the two men, once brothers in arms, faced off on the sodden boards. Maggie swallowed hard, the gold box nearly slipping from her grasp. She remembered Jed's words. Some legacies are forged in fire, not gold. Now, the cabin trembled between vengeance and mercy. Ethan's muzzle rose, aimed at Caleb's chest. With a single, fluid gesture, Caleb drew and fired. The shot cracked like a whip. Ethan staggered, hand clutching his side, face contorted with regret and pain. He fell in a watery heap at the foot of the porch. Jed's fury exploded. He lunged for the door, torch held high. Amos cursed and blasted a line of buckshot that ripped through the outlaw's coat, shredding cloth but missing flesh. Jed hissed and dropped the torch to the mud, where it sputtered out in steaming defeat. The remaining outlaws hesitated, then blinked under the steady gaze of townsfolk. Ramon crushed the final torch under his boot and stepped forward. "Go home," he said. "This isn't the welcome you sought." Jed, drenched and defeated, glanced at his men, broken, angry, remorseful. With a grim snarl, he turned and slunk into the storm, dragging Ethan's wounded form behind him. Inside the cabin, lanterns flickered back to life. Maggie dropped the gold box at Amos's feet, voice catching as she confessed, "I never wanted violence. I only wanted peace for Ellie's memory." Caleb knelt beside her, brushing rain from her brow. "You gave all of us that peace tonight," he said softly, eyes full of respect. Amos grunted, lowering his shotgun, "and saved this town by reminding us what we've lost and what we still can build." Maggie glanced at the broken locket lying on the battered table. It was no longer cutting her skin, but resting warm against the wood. It was a symbol of healing, not heartbreak. Dawn rose on a cleansed world. Clouds parted in pale wash of gold, and Dust Hollow's dusty streets glistened wet and new. Townsfolk emerged from cabins and tents, blinking against the light. Children ran past empty shops, laughter scattering like sparrows in flight. In the soft glow, Maggie walked to Ellie's grave beneath the cedar ridge. Fresh sod bore her daughter's name on a simple wooden marker. Kneeling, she reached for the gold box at her side. With trembling hands, she lifted each nugget and, in a single breath, whispered, "This will be a place of learning, Ellie's school." She pressed a handful of gold into the soil, a seed for tomorrow. Caleb found her there, footsteps silent on the dew-slick earth. He knelt in the shallow trench and brushed sod away to make room for a foundation stone. Under Maggie's guidance, they laid the first block, a rough sandstone slab cut by local hands. Townsfolk gathered, offering tools and prayers and soft murmurs. Ramon brought mortar-stained mittens. Amos helped carry the next stone. Each person placed a piece, and each piece carried a promise that Dust Hollow would rise again through care and compassion. Above them, the clearing sky stretched endless, as though granting a pardon for past sins. Later, by the cabin's porch, Caleb and Maggie shared quiet companionship. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair plastered by dew. "I meant what I said," he began, voice hushed. "My family, I lost them too. My wife and small son, taken by a fever I couldn't cure. I wandered, aimless. Then I found your locket in that mine, and Ellie's name whispered through its tarnish. It brought me here." Maggie's breath caught as tears pooled in her eyes. "I felt your kindness when you dug my Ellie's grave," she whispered. "It gave me courage to stand again." Caleb took her hand, pressing the locket's chain between their fingers. "Some scars heal when you build something new," he said softly. By midday, children gathered in what would soon be the schoolhouse, circling the foundation stones as Maggie laid chalk lines on a weathered board. Their small voices chattered with excitement about letters and numbers. Caleb stood at the back, watching Maggie in her teacher's cap, her posture calm and sure, the locket resting over her heart. Amos leaned on Ramon's shoulder, both smiling at the transformation. Dust Hollow itself seemed to breathe easier under the wide sky, its wounds staunched by solidarity and purpose. As the sun climbed, Maggie and Caleb paused to watch from the cedar ridge. The school's first classroom would stand there, bright with hope. The broken locket caught the morning light, mended now not by silver but by compassion. Maggie turned to Caleb and smiled, the weight of grief lifting like dawn's mist in the desert. He offered his arm, and she took it. Together, they gazed at the future they had forged, one of healing, community, and enduring love. If this story moved your heart, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of grit and grace.